The most dangerous mistake is believing someone cannot understand the words you never intended them to hear. The grand estate rested quietly beneath a pale autumn sunrise, its stone walls glowing softly as morning light stretched across perfectly trimmed gardens and tall oak trees swaying in the cool breeze. Inside, every hallway reflected polished marble floors, elegant artwork, and the disciplined rhythm of a household where every detail seemed carefully measured. Maya Robinson moved through the spacious kitchen with practiced confidence, tying the final knot of her black apron before arranging breakfast trays with remarkable precision. She never rushed. She never complained. While other employees hurried to finish their assignments before the owner descended the staircase, Maya quietly focused on every small detail, believing that dignity could exist even inside ordinary work. Most mornings passed unnoticed, and that suited her perfectly. She had learned years earlier that the loudest voices rarely carried the greatest wisdom. A senior house manager entered the kitchen holding a clipboard, scanning every countertop with sharp eyes before stopping beside one of the serving trays. His expression tightened. "Who prepared this table setting?" he asked firmly. Maya calmly stepped forward. "I did." Without waiting for another explanation, he pointed toward a folded linen napkin that had been placed several inches away from where he expected it to be. "Attention to detail matters in this house," he said with visible disappointment. Several employees lowered their heads without saying a word. Maya quietly corrected the placement, although she had followed the written instructions exactly as they had been left the previous evening. She chose not to argue. Experience had taught her that defending herself before someone was ready to listen rarely changed anything. As the manager walked away, another employee whispered an apologetic glance toward her, but Maya simply smiled to reassure him that everything was fine. She lifted the finished tray and began walking toward the dining room. Halfway across the corridor, she paused beside a large window overlooking the gardens. Believing herself completely alone, she exhaled softly and muttered under her breath in fluent Korean. "He mistakes authority for wisdom. One day someone will teach him the difference." Her voice was quiet, almost carried away by the distant sound of birds outside. She adjusted the tray and prepared to continue walking when another voice answered behind her in calm, flawless Korean. "Repeat that." Maya froze. Every muscle in her body seemed to stop at once. Slowly, she turned toward the source of the voice. Ethan Kong stood several feet behind her wearing a charcoal suit with the first morning sunlight outlining his calm expression. There was no anger on his face, no raised voice, no visible irritation. Instead, a faint smile rested at the corner of his mouth as though he had just discovered an unexpected mystery. He took one slow step forward, meeting her eyes without hesitation. Then, still speaking perfect Korean, he said quietly, "This time, look at me." The hallway fell completely silent. Even the distant sounds of breakfast preparation seemed to disappear. Maya stared at him in disbelief, her thoughts racing faster than her heartbeat. She had assumed no one inside the estate understood the language she had spent years studying. She had expected embarrassment, perhaps even dismissal from her position. Instead, Ethan simply waited with remarkable patience, his expression carrying curiosity rather than remained calm, measured, almost impossibly ordinary. Maya blinked in surprise, then nodded once. "Yes, sir." She carefully carried the tray into the formal dining room, trying to steady her breathing as sunlight poured through towering windows onto an elegant oak table prepared for another routine morning. Yet nothing about the morning felt routine anymore. While she quietly arranged fresh fruit, coffee, and warm pastries, she could still hear those flawless Korean words echoing in her memory. He had understood every syllable. Even more surprising, he had answered without anger. That puzzled her far more than any punishment would have. Throughout breakfast, Ethan never mentioned the incident again. He calmly reviewed business reports while occasionally thanking the staff for their work with simple courtesy that contrasted sharply with the intimidating reputation many employees whispered about. Maya remained focused on her responsibilities, speaking only when necessary. But every time she entered the room, she wondered whether another unexpected conversation was waiting. After breakfast ended, the household slowly returned to its familiar rhythm. Gardeners prepared the grounds for an afternoon reception, chefs discussed the evening menu, and housekeeping staff moved efficiently through the estate. Maya joined the laundry room, where several employees quietly folded freshly pressed linens. The same senior house manager who had criticized her earlier entered carrying another clipboard. His expression softened slightly when he noticed Maya organizing supplies. The dining room looked excellent this morning, he admitted without looking directly at her. Keep that standard. It was not an apology, but it was the closest anyone had ever heard from him. Maya simply smiled politely. Thank you. She had learned that genuine respect rarely arrived through arguments. Sometimes it appeared quietly, one small step at a time. A short while later, another employee approached Maya with a worried expression. One of the newer housekeepers had accidentally misplaced a detailed seating chart for the evening reception, leaving everyone anxious because several international guests were expected to arrive before sunset. Maya calmly searched the preparation room before discovering the chart had been filed inside the wrong binder. She quietly handed it back without drawing attention to the mistake, earning grateful smiles from the nervous staff. Ethan happened to walk past the open doorway just in time to witness the exchange. He said nothing. He simply observed how every employee instinctively turned toward Maya whenever a problem needed solving. There was no panic in her voice, no desire to receive praise, only quiet competence. As the afternoon continued, Ethan paused outside the library where Maya was carefully dusting shelves lined with books collected from around the world. Without looking away from the rows of volumes, he spoke gently. Your Korean is impressive. Maya hesitated before answering honestly. I studied it for many years. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. I noticed. Another brief silence settled between them before he selected an old Korean novel from the shelf and placed it on a nearby table. When your work is finished this evening, he said, tell me what you think of the author. Maya looked at the worn hardcover, then back at Ethan with visible surprise. He offered nothing more than a faint smile before quietly leaving the library. Standing alone among thousands of books, Maya realized that what had begun as a moment of embarrassment had unexpectedly become an invitation, and for reasons she still could not understand. The man she had misjudged seemed far more interested in discovering who she truly was than in remembering the words she wished he had never heard. That evening the estate settled into a quieter rhythm as golden light faded beyond the tall windows and soft lamps illuminated the endless hallways lined with polished wood and carefully framed artwork. Maya completed the last of her housekeeping duties before returning to the library, where the worn Korean novel still rested exactly where Ethan had placed it. She looked around to be certain no one needed assistance before carefully opening the book. Notes written in neat Korean handwriting filled the margins, not as corrections, but as thoughtful reflections about history, poetry, and the quiet differences between literal translation and true meaning. She gently traced one sentence with her fingertips. A language is not only spoken, it is lived. She smiled almost without realizing it. Whoever had written those notes understood Korean far beyond simple conversation. A few moments later, the library door opened quietly. Ethan stepped inside carrying a cup of coffee and another book beneath his arm. He noticed Maya reading, but showed no surprise. Instead, he walked toward the opposite side of the large reading table and asked in Korean, did the author meet your expectations? Maya slowly closed the novel before answering in the same language. The story is beautiful, but the notes in the margins are even better. Ethan's expression softened into an almost invisible smile. Those notes belonged to my grandfather. He believed books should become conversations instead of decorations. Maya looked around at thousands of carefully arranged volumes stretching from floor to ceiling. He must have loved learning. Ethan nodded. He taught me that understanding another language is impossible unless you first respect the people who speak it. The conversation flowed naturally after that, moving from literature to history, from traditional Korean poetry to American novels, each discovering that the other understood references few people would recognize. Maya found herself forgetting that she was speaking to the owner of the estate. Ethan seemed equally unconcerned with titles or positions. For a brief time, they were simply two people discussing ideas that had shaped their lives. Their conversation ended only when the grandfather clock echoed through the library, reminding them how much time had passed. As Maya prepared to return the novel to its shelf, Ethan asked one quiet question. Where did you learn Korean? She hesitated only briefly before answering honestly. College. I studied languages because I believed every new language gave me another way to understand people. Ethan listened carefully without interrupting. Then why are you working here instead of teaching? Maya smiled gently, though a faint sadness briefly crossed her face. Life sometimes changes plans before we are ready. My mother became seriously ill during graduate school. Caring for her became more important than finishing the future I had imagined. She spoke without bitterness, only quiet acceptance. Ethan remained silent for several thoughtful seconds before replying. Responsibilities reveal character more honestly than achievements. Maya looked at him with visible surprise. It was not the answer she expected. Most people responded with sympathy or uncomfortable silence whenever they learned she had stepped away from her academic career. Ethan offered neither. He simply acknowledged the choice with genuine respect. As she placed the novel back onto the shelf, footsteps approached from the hallway. Two junior employees entered carrying boxes of archived documents and immediately apologized for interrupting. Before either could lift the heavy containers onto the upper shelves, Maya calmly directed them toward a safer storage space that would keep the fragile papers organized by year and language. Ethan quietly watched the entire exchange. Once again, the employees naturally turned to Maya whenever knowledge mattered more than authority. As the younger staff thanked her and left the library smiling, Ethan glanced toward the endless rows of books before looking back at Maya. Without another word, he understood that beneath the simple black apron everyone noticed each day was a brilliant mind that had never stopped learning. And for the first time, he wondered how many remarkable stories remained hidden behind ordinary uniforms simply because no one had ever taken the time to ask. The following afternoon, the estate prepared for an important gathering that would bring together business leaders from several countries, including a delegation visiting from Seoul. Approached her without criticism. Instead, he handed her a revised seating chart and asked politely whether she could verify the placement cards because several names had been changed at the last minute. Maya carefully reviewed each card, quietly correcting 2 spelling errors in Korean that would have been immediately noticeable to native speakers. The manager paused, studying the corrected cards before offering a sincere nod of appreciation. "Thank you," he said simply. It was the first time he had spoken those words to her without hesitation. Maya smiled warmly before returning to her work, believing the moment needed no further attention. As evening approached, elegant black cars arrived one after another beneath the circular entrance of the estate. Guests exchanged courteous greetings while staff welcomed everyone with practiced professionalism. Ethan stood near the entrance, personally receiving the delegation before guiding them into the formal reception hall. Conversation flowed comfortably in English until one of the visiting executives casually referenced a well-known Korean proverb. The interpreter hesitated, searching unsuccessfully for an equivalent expression that preserved its meaning instead of merely translating the words. A brief silence settled across the room. Maya happened to be carrying a tray of tea nearby when she quietly recognized the difficulty. Without interrupting anyone, she gently approached the interpreter and softly suggested an alternative explanation that captured both the literal meaning and the cultural significance behind the proverb. The interpreter's face immediately brightened with relief before repeating Maya's interpretation to the guests. The Korean visitors smiled with genuine appreciation, several nodding in agreement as the conversation resumed naturally. Ethan noticed every detail from across the room. He watched the interpreter discreetly thank Maya before continuing without embarrassment, allowing the meeting to proceed as though no interruption had ever occurred. Throughout the reception, similar moments quietly followed. A guest asked about an old Korean literary reference displayed in a decorative calligraphy scroll hanging in the hallway. Maya happened to be passing with fresh coffee and politely explained the historical context in only a few sentences before excusing herself and continuing her duties without waiting for praise. Later, another visitor complimented the estate's collection of Korean ceramics. Maya briefly identified the region where one handcrafted vase had originated and explained why its design represented hospitality rather than status. Each answer was concise, respectful, and offered only because someone genuinely needed help. She never lingered long enough to become the center of attention. As the evening drew to a close, several members of the visiting delegation personally thanked Ethan for the remarkable hospitality they had experienced throughout the estate. One senior executive smiled warmly before adding, "The young woman assisting your staff understands our language with remarkable care. She does not simply translate words. She preserves meaning. That is a rare gift." Ethan glanced across the reception hall where Maya was quietly helping another employee collect empty cups, completely unaware that anyone had been discussing her. He realized that true expertise rarely announced itself. It revealed itself naturally whenever others needed guidance. Standing beneath the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, Ethan understood that everyone had admired Maya's kindness for days, but tonight they had finally witnessed something equally extraordinary. Her knowledge never existed to impress people. It existed to help them understand one another, and in that quiet purpose he recognized a form of wisdom that could never be measured by titles, wealth, or position alone. The morning after the international reception, the atmosphere inside the estate felt noticeably different. Nothing had been officially announced, yet the quiet respect surrounding Maya had become impossible to ignore. Employees who had once hurried past her now paused to greet her with genuine warmth. The senior house manager no longer checked her work searching for mistakes. Instead, he occasionally asked for her opinion whenever written instructions involved foreign languages or unfamiliar cultural traditions. Maya accepted every conversation with the same calm humility that had defined her from the beginning. She neither celebrated the change nor questioned it. She simply continued doing what she had always believed was right. Ethan noticed the difference as well, but what interested him most was not how others now viewed Maya. It was how completely unchanged she remained. Later that afternoon, he walked through the west corridor and noticed the library door standing slightly open. Curious, he stepped inside and found Maya organizing several old storage boxes that had recently been moved from the attic. Dust floated gently through narrow beams of sunlight, while rows of books surrounded her in peaceful silence. One weathered notebook had fallen open across the table. Ethan glanced toward it only after Maya invited him to do so. Inside were pages filled with carefully handwritten notes comparing Korean, English, Spanish, and French expressions, each accompanied by observations about culture, history, and human behavior rather than simple vocabulary. Some pages contained essays analyzing how identical words could carry entirely different emotions depending on tradition and context. Others held lesson plans designed for students learning multiple languages at once. Ethan slowly turned another page before looking toward Maya with quiet admiration. "You wrote all of this?" Maya nodded almost shyly. "Mostly during graduate school. I continued adding to it while caring for my mother. Studying languages helped me stay hopeful even when life became difficult." Ethan carefully closed the notebook without treating it like an ordinary collection of notes. "This belongs in a classroom, not inside a storage box." Maya smiled gently. "Knowledge does not disappear simply because it waits." Before Ethan could answer, an elderly groundskeeper knocked softly on the open door holding a letter he had received from his grandson stationed overseas. The man apologized for interrupting and explained that part of the letter had been written in Korean because his grandson had recently married into a Korean family. Maya immediately invited him inside, read the passage aloud with warmth, and translated every sentence carefully, preserving not only the words but the affection behind them. The elderly man wiped away grateful tears before thanking her sincerely. "You gave me my grandson's voice today," he said quietly. After he left, the library became silent once again. Ethan remained thoughtful for several moments before speaking. "Yesterday you helped international guests. Today you helped a grandfather understand his family. You treat both moments with exactly the same care." Maya looked toward the window where autumn leaves drifted peacefully across the gardens. "Every conversation matters to the people having it," she replied. "That is reason enough to give it our best." Her answer lingered in the quiet room long after the words faded. Ethan realized that Maya had never viewed language as a talent designed to impress anyone. She saw it as a bridge allowing people to reach one another across fear, misunderstanding, and distance. Standing among shelves filled with books collected from around the world, he finally understood that the greatest gift she possessed was not the number of languages she spoke. It was her unwavering belief that every human being deserved to feel understood, regardless of where they came from or what position they held in life. 3 days later, an unexpected opportunity arrived without warning. Shortly after sunrise, Ethan received a call informing him that an influential educational foundation from South Korea had requested an unscheduled visit while traveling through the United States. Their representatives were considering partnerships that would support language education, cultural exchange, and community learning programs, but they had adjusted their itinerary only hours earlier after hearing about Ethan's international initiatives. The estate immediately shifted into careful preparation. Staff members organized meeting rooms, arranged refreshments, and reviewed schedules while assistants gathered documents describing charitable projects already in progress. Everything appeared ready until one final complication emerged. The lead representative announced that he preferred discussing educational philosophy entirely in Korean because several ideas lost their deeper meaning when translated too literally into English. The professional interpreter hired for the meeting suddenly became ill and informed the estate that she would be unable to arrive on time. A quiet wave of concern spread through the conference room. Ethan remained composed, reviewing the agenda without visible frustration, yet everyone understood how important the conversation would be. As the scheduled arrival drew closer, the senior house manager hesitated before speaking. He glanced toward Ethan and quietly suggested, "There may be someone already inside the estate who can help." Minutes later, Maya entered the conference room, still wearing her simple black housekeeping uniform, having been asked only whether she would feel comfortable assisting if necessary. She immediately clarified one condition before anyone could misunderstand her purpose. "I am happy to help if communication becomes difficult, but the conversation should always belong to the guests." Ethan nodded with genuine respect. "That is exactly why I asked." Soon afterward, the delegation arrived. Warm greetings were exchanged before everyone gathered around the long conference table overlooking the gardens. The discussion began smoothly until one professor introduced a traditional Korean educational principle built around patience, humility, and lifelong learning. Several expressions carried cultural meanings that could not be translated word for word. Maya listened carefully before offering clear English explanations that preserved both the language and the philosophy behind every sentence. Whenever Ethan responded, she translated his ideas back into natural Korean without adding unnecessary formality or removing his sincerity. The conversation flowed so effortlessly that after several minutes the guests completely forgot they were speaking through another person. Instead of hearing separate languages, they experienced one uninterrupted exchange of ideas. As the meeting continued, a distinguished professor smiled warmly toward Maya. In Korean, he asked, "Where did you teach?" Maya looked surprised before quietly answering, "I have never had the opportunity." The professor blinked with genuine disbelief. "Your translations show the instincts of an experienced educator, not simply a linguist." Maya lowered her eyes modestly. "I only try to make sure everyone feels fully understood." Those simple words left the room unusually quiet. When the meeting concluded, the delegation thanked Ethan for his hospitality before expressing enthusiastic interest in supporting future educational projects together. After the guests departed, Ethan remained standing near the conference table watching sunlight drift across the empty chairs where meaningful conversations had just unfolded. He turned toward Maya with calm admiration rather than celebration. "Today you did much more than translate languages," he said softly. "You gave every person in this room the confidence to speak honestly." Maya smiled gently, almost embarrassed by the praise. "Understanding people has always mattered more to me than impressing them." Ethan looked toward the open doors leading into the gardens, realizing that true leadership was not measured by how many voices a person controlled, but by how many voices they helped others hear. And in that quiet realization, he knew the future waiting for Maya would never again be limited by the simple title written beside her name on an employee record. The following week, the atmosphere inside the estate carried a quiet sense of anticipation. News of the successful meeting with the Educational Foundation had spread through every department, yet no official announcement explained why the visitors had departed with such enthusiasm. Employees exchanged curious conversations while continuing their daily routines, but those who had witnessed the meeting understood that something important had changed. Maya noticed the subtle difference immediately. More people greeted her by name. Younger employees sought her advice when preparing materials for international guests, and the senior house manager no longer assigned tasks with distant authority. Instead, He asked thoughtful questions and listened carefully to her suggestions before making decisions. Maya accepted every interaction with the same calm humility she had always shown. She never behaved as though anything extraordinary had happened because, in her mind, helping people understand one another had never been extraordinary. It had simply been the right thing to do. Late that afternoon, Ethan requested that every employee gather in the estate's main reception hall before the end of the workday. Such meetings were rare, and quiet speculation filled the corridors as cooks, gardeners, drivers, assistants, and housekeeping staff assembled beneath the crystal chandeliers. Maya stood near the back of the room, hoping to remain unnoticed among her colleagues. Ethan stepped to the front without dramatic ceremony, thanking everyone for the professionalism they demonstrated during the recent international visit. He spoke about teamwork, preparation, and the importance of every role inside the estate. No one person, he explained, could create excellence alone. After a brief pause, his eyes found Maya across the room. There is one person whose contribution deserves to be recognized publicly, he said with calm sincerity. Maya immediately looked down, believing he must be referring to someone else. Ethan continued. Several guests personally praised the professionalism of a member of our staff whose title does not begin to describe the value she brings to this household. The room became perfectly still. Ethan walked toward Maya, stopping only a few feet away before addressing everyone with quiet conviction. Maya Robinson is not simply our maid. She is an educator, a linguist, a problem solver, and someone who reminds us that knowledge and character are never defined by a job title. No applause came at first because everyone seemed too surprised to move. Then the elderly groundskeeper began clapping. The gardener joined him. Soon the entire hall filled with warm applause that carried none of the excitement of obligation and all of the sincerity of earned respect. Maya looked around with visible emotion, humbled rather than proud. When the applause finally faded, Ethan turned back toward the staff. From this day forward, he said, any employee with ideas for improving communication, education, or cultural understanding will know exactly who to consult. Expertise should never remain hidden simply because it wears an apron. Several younger employees smiled toward Maya with unmistakable admiration. The senior house manager quietly approached her after the meeting ended. I owe you something I should have offered much sooner, he said. I judged your position before I understood your abilities. I am sorry, Maya answered with her familiar gentle smile. We all learn at different moments. What matters is that we keep learning. Her words carried no trace of resentment, only grace. As evening settled outside and golden light reflected across the estate's quiet gardens, Ethan watched employees leave the reception hall speaking to one another with a new sense of appreciation. He realized that genuine leadership did not elevate one person above everyone else. It taught everyone to recognize greatness where they had previously overlooked it. At that moment, Maya had not received a promotion on paper, yet something far more meaningful had happened. Every person inside the estate now saw her exactly as she had always been, and the respect she earned that day would become the foundation for everything they would build together in the future. Several months passed, and the quiet transformation that had begun inside the estate gradually reached far beyond its stone walls. The partnership with the South Korean Educational Foundation officially launched its first community language initiative, creating free evening classes for children from working families, immigrants adjusting to new lives, and adults who had always dreamed of learning another language but never believed they would have the opportunity. Ethan personally funded the renovation of an unused neighborhood building, yet he insisted that every classroom, every lesson, and every educational decision should be guided by the people who truly understood teaching rather than business. Maya accepted the invitation to help design the curriculum only after making one condition perfectly clear. The program should belong to the students, she said quietly, not to the people whose names appear on the building. Ethan smiled with genuine agreement. That is exactly why you should lead it. Every Saturday morning, the classrooms filled with eager learners representing dozens of cultures and backgrounds. Young children practiced their first Korean greetings beside retired veterans learning Spanish for their grandchildren. College students volunteered after classes, helping newcomers improve their English while discovering traditions from countries they had never visited. Maya moved naturally from one classroom to another, encouraging every student with the same patience she had once shown inside the estate. She celebrated small victories with genuine enthusiasm, whether someone mastered a difficult pronunciation or finally gathered the confidence to begin speaking aloud. She never rushed anyone, never embarrassed anyone, and never measured success by perfect grammar. Instead, she reminded every class that learning another language always began with respecting another human being. Ethan visited regularly, though he deliberately avoided standing at the center of attention. He greeted volunteers, carried boxes of donated textbooks, assembled bookshelves, and quietly listened as students shared stories about how the program had changed their confidence. One afternoon, he paused outside a classroom where Maya was explaining that every language contained words impossible to translate directly because they carried the history, hopes, and emotions of the people who first spoke them. The students listened with complete attention while writing thoughtful notes, and Ethan realized she had become exactly what she had always been preparing to become long before life interrupted her plans. After class, one teenage girl approached Maya with visible excitement. "Before coming here," she admitted, "I was afraid to speak because I thought people would laugh at my accent. Now I want to become a language teacher too." Maya smiled warmly. "Never be ashamed of an accent. It simply tells the world you were brave enough to learn something new." Ethan heard those words from across the hallway and quietly reflected on the first conversation they had shared months earlier. Back then he had believed. He understood languages because he could speak them fluently. Maya had shown him that true understanding required something much deeper than vocabulary. It required humility, patience, and the willingness to listen before speaking. As the afternoon sun streamed through the classroom windows, volunteers stacked books, children laughed while practicing new phrases together, and families lingered in the hallways exchanging conversations across cultures that had once seemed separated by impossible distance. Stepped from his car, wearing a simple navy jacket instead of the tailored business suits that once seemed inseparable from his identity. He greeted teachers, carried folding chairs toward the outdoor stage, and thanked volunteers preparing refreshments for the afternoon celebration. No photographers followed him, and no speeches had been written in his honor. He preferred it that way. The center had never existed to celebrate one individual. It existed because hundreds of ordinary people had decided to invest in one another. As families filled the courtyard, the Educational Foundation announced that similar language centers would soon open in several additional cities, allowing thousands more students to receive the same opportunities that had begun with one unexpected conversation months earlier. During the ceremony, a teenage student stepped onto the stage and smiled toward Maya before asking a simple question that echoed across the quiet audience. "Miss Robinson, what made you believe people from different worlds could truly understand each other?" Maya looked thoughtfully across the gathering before answering with the same calm voice that had once spoken softly inside a silent hallway. "Every language begins with listening before speaking. The moment we decide another person is worth understanding, we have already started learning." Warm applause filled the courtyard, but Maya simply smiled toward her students instead of accepting the attention for herself. After the ceremony ended, a young reporter interviewing volunteers approached Ethan with genuine curiosity. "Everyone keeps talking about this incredible program," she said. "How did all of this begin?" Ethan looked across the courtyard where Maya was helping children stack books and laughing with families who now considered the center their second home. A quiet smile crossed his face before he answered. "It began the day someone believed I could not understand." The reporter looked momentarily puzzled, but Ethan offered nothing more because the lesson had never belonged to a single sentence. It belonged to everything that followed. As the afternoon slowly faded into evening, students continued reading. Together beneath the trees while teachers exchanged ideas, volunteers cleaned classrooms, and children practiced new words with fearless enthusiasm. Maya and Ethan stood for a brief moment watching the joyful scene unfold without needing to say anything at all. They both understood that the greatest transformation had never come from wealth, authority, or intelligence alone. It had come from choosing curiosity over judgment, humility over pride, and understanding over assumption. As the lights inside the language center glowed warmly against the evening sky, every conversation taking place within its walls became quiet proof that dignity grows wherever people choose to truly hear one another. And on that peaceful evening, the world was gently reminded that the most meaningful words are often the ones that teach us to listen first.